So lately, I've been feeling kind of down, kind of unmotivated, just not really wanting to do that much painting, not that much of my creative work. I just didn't feel like doing it, and I kind of got myself into a rut, and I just had to kind of grind my way to it. It's like sometimes I don't feel like painting at all. It just makes me wonder why I'm not motivated enough to do something that I think I'm passionate about, something that I've been doing for years. And I thought to myself, why am I not motivated anymore? Why don't I feel like doing something that I feel like I'm supposed to do? Something that I feel like is kind of my mission in life, my purpose in life. So sometimes you wonder about that, but guess what, guys? Guess what? I did it anyways. And if you're a creative type like I am, you should too. You should just do it too, And that goes with the whole idea of discipline being superior to motivation, which I highly regard now. Discipline is something that you do regardless of how you feel. Motivation is primarily emotional based, and that's something that you should not be following. You shouldn't be trusting your feelings because when you're motivated to do something, you have that chip in your shoulder. Like you want to do something, you want to prove people wrong, or you want to show the world what you're made of. I mean, there's certain contexts where that can be applicable. I mean, don't get me wrong, motivation can be really inspiring sometimes, but I wouldn't primarily rely on that all the time because it's just so fleeting, it's so fickle. Because there's days where you're not going to want to do something. You're going to want to possibly abandon that, make you question yourself, like why you're doing it in the first place. And that's not the best thing to anchor your purpose, because if you're on your purpose, if you're on a mission, you got to do it regardless. I mean, there's days where you're not going to want to do it, but you have to show up anyways. And that's where discipline comes in, because discipline, it overrides anything else. I mean, you could have motivation and discipline at the same time. Just put those two together. That's a huge uh, thing. That's bigger than one or the other. If you have both of them, that's great. But there's days where you're not gonna have that emotional response, that inspiration. That's where that grit comes in. And we as creatives, as artists, and with pretty much anybody else who has a project or a goal, that's where it's going to be a lot more important to cultivate that sense of craftsmanship, that work mentality where you just show up regardless of how you feel. I mean, there's a lot of days where I didn't want to paint anymore. There's a lot of days where I just wanted to just sit around, play video games all day, or I don't know, watch TV shows. And that's where I realized that I just gotta show up regardless, because it's like in the back of my mind, I have this sense of work ethic. I'm like, you know what? I got this deadline to finish. I got this painting to finish. I got this client to sell this artwork to, and sometimes it doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what you think. You just gotta show up and do it anyways. That's where discipline comes in. Like there's days where I just showed up for half hour or I painted for an hour, and the fact that I stay consistent on it for days on end, the painting it painted itself after a while, because it all adds up. I mean, you can't just see it as a 1 day thing, especially if you're a professional and you just show up and you let those days add up. I mean, think about it. If you paint for an hour a day, a week of that is, that's 7 hours worth of work. It's like maybe half of a painting for like those big monumental projects that you have going on. So that's just something to think about. And a lot of it comes into play with my energy levels too. Like I get tired sometimes and I don't feel like painting. But me personally, I'll listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of audiobooks too, just to keep my mind occupied, and I educate myself at the same time as well as I work on my project. So that sense of work ethic, that's gonna be really important to come into play. And I mentioned in this other video about how genius emerges from a lot of the crazy ones. Well, a lot of those people, they cultivated that discipline because they're professionals, and we, as the creative types, we should strive for that. We should have that self-image in our minds about being professionals, because the amateurs, I mean, it's good to have art as a hobby. You know, if that's just a hobby of yours, that's great. You know, it's a great hobby to have. It's very therapeutic. But if you really want to take it to the next level, if you really want to separate yourself from the amateurs and really get yourself going to bigger and higher, loftier goals, you're going to want to cultivate that sense of grit, that work ethic, where sometimes it does feel like a job. Because, I mean, if you're really making serious money off of this stuff, you probably have already established that work ethic, that sense of grit, and wanted to really push yourself. And so the author, Stephen Pressfield, of the book called The War of Art, he talks about how the professionals, they show up regardless. And when you keep showing up, like on a consistent basis, you're going to train that mind to access those higher faculties where you're able to access those creative fields. You're going to access those wavelengths of your brain that are able to generate that type of intelligence, that creative intelligence, as opposed to like more of the base logic types of intelligence. So once you keep showing up, you're going to be able to have an easier access to reach that state of flow where you're going to just have an easier time planning out and executing those things into that creative world. Because face it, the creative world, it's not the same as the logical world. The logical world, it's very organized, pre-planned. You most of the time know what you're doing because you write it out, you deliberate what you're going to be doing ahead of time. It's very cerebral. But the creative field, I mean, naturally, it's going to have that very fickle, very like scattered type of thinking, because it's generated very intuitively. So you want to kind of marry that type of thinking with a logical side, especially if you're a professional. And that's where discipline comes in. You're going to have to like get these two concepts together, these two extremes together. Like one side is the logical side, the other side is the very creative, scattered type of side. You want to marry these two together and develop that strong work ethic, that discipline, to be able to showcase your art, music, or whatever to the world, and do it on a consistent basis where you become more successful towards it. So that's all I wanted to say about this, guys. That sense of discipline, that grit, just showing up even if you don't feel like it for even an hour or two each day, maybe even less than that. But it just helps strengthen that muscle of self-discipline. So yeah, peace.